The honourable member for Courtenay-Alberni.
Madam Speaker, tonight I stand with the Nuu-chah-nulth people to call on the Government of Canada to honour their commitment for reconciliation with First Nations and to uphold the Supreme Court of Canada's decisions. It's been 7 years since the Supreme Court of Canada reaffirmed the Nuu-chah-nulth's Aboriginal rights to catch and sell fish. Even after a Supreme Court of Canada justice had mandated the government to deal fairly and negotiate with the Nuu-chah-nulth Nations on their fishing rights, they still remain without a negotiated agreement or a reasonable offer from the federal government to exercise their proven, established and constitutionally protected rights. So instead of being on the water fishing where they belong, the Nuu-chah-nulth are still in court arguing with federal government lawyers, sound familiar, who continue to try and minimize their Aboriginal fishing rights. Just last June, in fact, we felt hopeful for meaningful progress when the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans met with the Nuu-chah-nulth chiefs here in Ottawa. Still, nothing has changed and the conflict continues. At their last September meeting with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, it was made clear by DFO officials that their department had no mandate to implement the Nuu-chah-nulth Nations rights-based fisheries. That's when the Hatwiya, the hereditary chiefs, dismissed the DFO regional director from their meeting and asked her not to return until Canada develops a meaningful mandate to implement their rights-based fisheries. Madam Speaker, in an unprecedented move, the Nuu-chah-nulth Hatwiya, the hereditary chiefs, have also told the Prime Minister he is no longer welcome on their lands until this conflict is resolved. For thousands of years, salmon has been the main food source and food sustenance of the Nuu-chah-nulth people, and the Nuu-chah-nulth just want to find their rightful place in a new respectful and trusting relationship with Canada. Here we have an economic development opportunity that supports self-determination, and finally we have a government that says they are on side and support Indigenous people with action. But instead this government, like the Harper government, refuses to let them move forward. Indigenous people have repeatedly said enough already. As we know, the Crown has a constitutional duty to consult and accommodate Indigenous peoples before taking action that may affect claimed or proven Aboriginal and treaty rights. This is a recognized legal requirement pursuant to Section 35 of the Constitution. The Supreme Court tells us that the underlying purpose of the duty to consult and accommodate is to advance reconciliation in the relationship between Indigenous peoples and the Crown. This duty to consult and accommodate is in line with the Prime Minister's mandate letter to the Minister of Justice. It seems like all the pieces are in place to move forward with a fair negotiation of the Nuu-chah-nulth fishing rights. So why is this government stalling? Why is Canada's relationship with the Nuu-chah-nulth Nations not moving towards reconciliation? The Nuu-chah-nulth deserve to have answers to these questions, Madam Speaker, and every time I ask these questions, I don't get the answers. The government lawyers continue to argue in court that the Nuu-chah-nulth fishing rights should be minimized. The ministers say one thing and do another. I have lived in the Nuu-chah-nulth territories for 2 decades, and I've come to know the Nuu-chah-nulth people to be respectful, kind, patient, and more than fair. So I'm hoping the government will consider showing that respect back. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans must be given a clear mandate to negotiate fairly. I ask the minister opposite to please explain the government's next action steps to resolve this conflict so the Nuu-chah-nulth can find their rightful place in this new relationship with Canada, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Start by thanking the member opposite for his interest on this issue. Et vous savez, l'établissement d'une relation, comme vous le savez.
You know that the establishment of a nation-to-nation relationship founded on acknowledgement of rights and partnership is one of the top priorities of our government. We want it to be clear, Madam Speaker, the federal government is not opposing the rights of the 5 Nuu-chah-nulth First Nations. On the contrary, our government remains committed to the consultation and negotiation process and accommodating and implementing the rights of First Nations. In its decision dated November 3, 2009, the Supreme Court of British Columbia found that the 5 Nuu-chah-nulth bands on the west coast of Vancouver Island have an Aboriginal right to fish for any species of fish within their fishing territories, which extends offshore 9 miles and to sell that fish. On the appeal, the Court of Appeal excluded the geoduck from the scope of that.
Which the court characterized as community-based localized fisheries involving wide community participation and using small low-cost boats. Consultation and negotiation with the 5 Nuu-chah-nulth First Nations have been ongoing since 2010. À la suite de l'établissement de ce droit,
following the establishment of the right, the party set up a substantive consultation and negotiation process that was modeled on treaty negotiations with a main table for negotiations and a joint working group for technical discussions to work with the First Nations to address outstanding fisheries issues.
The main table and technical discussion, DFO senior official have met regularly with the First Nation to help work out the details to accommodating the First Nation rights. Les enjeux faisant l'objet des consultations.
The matters that are subject of consultations are inherently complex. One of the significant challenges for these ongoing negotiations is that there's a different view on the scope of the right, which was described by the court as a right to sell fish into the commercial marketplace, but not on an industrial scale. Since 2010, significant fishing access has been provided to the First Nations. For example, in 2007, the First Nations had 23 commercial licenses, and now they have access to over 126 licenses and additional quota. In 2015, to help guide the discussions, DFO developed a negotiating framework to enable DFO and the First Nations to further test and evaluate the accommodation of preferred means fishing through local summer boat fishery approaches for Chinook salmon and other species of interest to the First Nations. Through these consultations, we are seeking to continue implementation of the Court's decisions, provide regular commercial access to participate in commercial fisheries, enable fishing by the First Nations using preferred means, ensure that after food, social, and ceremonial requirements, there is access for the First Nations for the regular commercial and recreational sectors in the fishery, and ensure that proper management and control mechanisms are in place to support conservation and compliance for all fisheries.
Are complicated matters, the consultation and negotiation process established by DFO and the 5 First Nations have helped develop a common understanding of our respective views and is assisting us in finding mutual agreeable resolution to outstanding issues. Je peux vous assurer que le gouvernement est déterminé.
I can assure you that the government is committed to working with the First Nations through the current consultation and negotiation processes to accommodate the rights of the First Nations.
The honourable member for Courtenay-Alberni.
Madam Speaker, one thing that the government has in common with government lawyers is that the government is basically continuing to try and minimize the Aboriginal fishing rights of the Nuu-chah-nulth. And that's clear in what I just heard today and what we're seeing in the courts. This isn't a nation-to-nation relationship. This isn't about consultation and accommodation. Accommodation is coming to the table with a mandate to negotiate something fairly, respectfully, based on principles that are going to advance each nation to nation so that they can thrive. This is the sustenance of these nations. I'm asking the member, will the government issue a clear mandate to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to negotiate fairly with the Nuu-chah-nulth Nations so they can implement their rights-based fisheries? And I invite the member opposite to explain how the government will move beyond its words and show real actions that back up their commitments to the Nuu-chah-nulth people and Indigenous people.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and the Coast Guard.
As I said before, you know that the renewed nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous people is a top priority for our government. Encore une fois, nous ne nous opposons pas.
Our government is not opposing the rights of the 5 Nuu-chah-nulth First Nations. The government takes this right seriously and has been working with the First Nation.
With the 5 First Nations have been ongoing since 2010. Et comme je l'ai dit, Madame la Présidente,
and as I said, since that time, Madam Speaker, significant additional commercial fisheries access has been provided and demonstration fisheries established to test the preferred means approaches to fishing described in the decision. We continue to work together in order to come up with acceptable solutions to resolve outstanding issues as we implement the right.
Working with the First Nation through the current consultation and negotiation process to accommodate their right. Thank you, Madam Speaker.